Hello, hello, and welcome to the Sober Butterfly. Today we are joined with a very special guest. We have Tawny Lara here. Tawny is known for her incredible book, which I'm holding here, Dry Humping, A Guide to Booze-Free Dating, Sex and Relationships. Tawny, I think I was first introduced to you when I got sober 3.5 years ago. You came across my social media. That's how I got sober. A big part of it was social, and your account really stood out to me. You are known in the sober world as the sober sexpert, which I think is genius. And so I would love to have you just kind of get into today your expertise, sharing what it means to be a sober person trying to navigate the very difficult subject known as sex. So I say all that to say welcome, Tawny, to the show. How are you? How are you today?
Hello, I am so excited to be here, and it's good to see you again. I know we've met a few times out and about in the New York sober scene, and love the name of the podcast. I love that.
Thank you.
I think I saw you, didn't you do an episode about like ADHD and
I
sobriety?
did. I was
Like,
recently diagnosed. Yep.
yeah,
Mhm.
I'm not, but two people very close to me are, so I'm very that subject means a lot to me, and I'm glad that you cover those kind of topics on your
Thank
show.
you. The link between ADHD or like neurodivergency and alcohol abuse or use self-medicating is very common. I didn't realize until I was diagnosed. So I appreciate
Yeah.
you for saying that, and doing my research for today's episode. I know that you mentioned before sobriety, you felt you were self-medicating with alcohol. And so I would love just to hear a little bit about your story. Take us back to, I know you're from Texas. So yeah, do you mind shedding some light about what life looked like before your move to NYC?
Yes, absolutely. Let's go all the way back. I grew up in Waco, Texas, and I was your very stereotypical bartending party girl. Think of, a girl dancing on the bar, going woo to
Totally ugly, but
yeah,
not in New York.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. But I even did work at a country bar, so yeah, kind of.
I love
Um,
that.
but like, yeah, I just want to paint the picture of like I was your stereotypical blackout drunk party girl. If I was not serving drinks behind the bar, I was on the other side of the bar taking shots or dancing on the bar. My whole life was in the bar. That's where I met friends. That's where I met sexual partners. That's where I met long-term partners. It was my whole world. And I had a very non-traditional college experience where I didn't graduate until I turned 28. And shortly after I turned 28, I moved to the Woodlands, which is like Houston area. And that
Okay.
I had a year there where I really had no idea what I was going to do with my life, but I knew I wanted to get out of Waco and figure out what my next chapter was. And that year, I lived with my aunt and saved up money. I traveled internationally for the first time. I was, out of my caterpillar into my sober butterfly wings, if you
I
will.
love that. Fly baby. Yes, I
Um,
love that.
and ultimately, I took, this a Euro trip. This is like a very stereotypical American, like I went to Europe and changed my life. So, but it was me. It was
Yeah.
literally me. And then right after I came back from my trip to Europe, I bought a one-way ticket to New York. Something within that year, something within traveling, seeing the world, I was like, life is too short. I want to be a writer who lives in New York City. And I had hot pink hair at the time. I was going through my Saturn return.
I love that.
Just painting the full picture for you. So, I moved to New York City to pursue writing, and very quickly after I moved here, I started to reevaluate my relationship with alcohol. I'm no longer around my bartending party girl friends. I'm hanging out with people who can have one or two drinks instead of drinking until they black out. I would order a round of shots for the table, and then people would look at me like, "What are you doing? This is not how. This is a Tuesday. What are we like?" It was
Yup.
really like the first time that people they weren't judgmental to me, but it was the first time that I was around people who didn't drink like I drank, if that makes
Gotcha.
sense.
That makes sense.
And so that was hugely formative to me. So this was 2015. I moved to New York in June of 2015. I quit drinking November of 2015.
Wow.
And I had this very, non-cinematic rock bottom where I was just in a pub talking to friends about how I don't have enough time to write. And something clicked. When I left that pub, I was like, okay, you just spent 4 hours
Mm-hmm.
drinking, talking about how you don't have time to write. Maybe there's a connection here. And
Mm-hmm.
that really was the beginning of my alcohol-free journey. Again, that was November 30th of 2015. This is before we had the term sober curious. This is before, this is when O'Doul's was our only non-alc option. I love hearing you say that you found me on social media because like that wasn't even a thing. Like I was one
Mm-hmm.
of the first to be like Instagram was still pretty new and we're all kind of figuring out what it is. And I started posting about my sober journey on Instagram, and I too got sober through these other incredible humans that I met. And I did not go through the AA 12-step route, and I met incredible people. And fast forward to, now I'm 9 years in recovery.
I would like to sort of hone in because 2015, yeah, that was pre sober curious movement as far as I'm aware, right? So
Yeah.
you're one of the founders. I'm going to call you one of the founders, the OGs. And that's really impressive. I'm curious to learn from you, Tawny. When you were getting sober, once you realized, okay, maybe I'm not realizing my potential here. I'm complaining that I don't have time to write. And here I am, ironically, at a bar talking about how I don't have time to write. So I want to know from you, were you treating sobriety as a social experiment, or was it more like I recognize that I have something deep within me that is problematic in terms of my relationship with alcohol?
It started out as number one, the
Okay,
social experiment. And then I quickly realized, oh shit, there's there's some stuff under there, you know?
got you.
I I was about to turn 30 and I was like, what if I just don't drink for my whole 30th year? And
Wow.
so I was like, this is people weren't even doing dry January back
Yeah.
then. I was like, I don't know where I got the idea of a dry year. It just came to me. I was like, like I said, Return of Saturn, turning 30, new to New York. I was like, let's shake things up. Let's give up booze for a year and see what happens. So
Mm-hmm.
looking back, I would 100% say I was sober curious.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have that language yet.
Got you. It's funny not to parallel our lives, but I can't help it as you share because I moved to New York around the same time. I moved in 2014. And when I tell you, it's so fascinating to me that you got sober when you moved to New York because I found everything under the sun. When I moved to New York, like my drinking escalated. It was an ecosystem definitely catered for someone like me who was still very much at the height or the pinnacle of their drinking and their party girl years. But I think it's a nice reminder that it's where you are. Like, it's not necessarily where you are, like location. It's more so like where you are and where you want to be. Like, internally, it sounds like you had done the work. You had had that summer in Europe, or not so, you didn't say
Yeah.
summer, but you had your trip. You had these moments and you were just done or ready for a change. And it's interesting as well because I got sober at 30 and I have so many conversations
Mm.
with people. There's something magical about 3-0 or approaching 3-0.
Yeah.
It's like maybe you're just done. Like you're like, stick a fork in me. I've been there, done that. Insanity. It's like insanity is quite literally doing the same thing and
It
expecting
is.
different results. And at a certain point, it's like, okay, fool me once, shame on you. But I'm talking to myself quite literally in the mirror, and I've done the same thing over and over again. I'm tired. I'm tired.
Yeah,
Something
no,
happens at 30.
you're 100% correct. And you are not the first person to be like, how the hell did you get sober in New York City? I couldn't
Right.
do, but like growing up in a smaller town, there was
Mm,
nothing else to do but
I see.
drink and have sex. So I did
Yeah.
those things. And then
Yeah.
I moved to New York and there's concerts and theater and museums and comedy shows. I mean, there's just so much to do here
Yeah.
that it just I was just like, why am I going to spend my time in a bar? Like I want to explore New York City,
I
but
remember.
like I also understand how, I wonder what it would have been like if I moved here when I was like 25 instead of
Mm-hmm.
30. But who knows? Who really
No,
knows? But you're right. There is something about, 30 and then like I'm turning 40 this year. So I'm like, okay,
beautiful.
what's my next thing? I don't know. But yeah.
Well, you've accomplished so much in your years of sobriety, and I'm going to get into all of that. I would love to hear from you because I would love to focus this conversation around something that I think is quite uncomfortable for people. I'm uncomfortable even saying the word sometimes. No, I'm a sexual person. I love sex. I actually have found in getting sober that my sex life is tenfold. It is so much better than when I was drinking. And I didn't realize how much I was using alcohol to lower my inhibitions in order to have sex, which I think is a natural process. And I was uncomfortable with sex. And I didn't realize that at the time. I've always considered myself to be pretty, like, open minded and experimental, but I was leaning a lot on alcohol. And I feel like a lot of people do that. Like, if I'm being honest with you, Tawny, and if anyone's listening at home and has the same experience, I would love to hear because I had never had sex with someone for the first time without alcohol. Like I didn't realize that until I got sober. So I would love to just hear from you. Like, what shift did you experience, if any, when you went from drinking? Because you mentioned, before small town life, bartending, drinking and sex kind of synonymous, or they coexist, they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
So, what was that shift like for you when you decided to get sober, and how did that impact your sex life?
Well, I was exactly like you just said, like how you felt. When I first quit drinking, again in 2015, the thought of dating, let alone hooking up, let alone communicating, let alone setting boundaries, like all of these things that you need to do to have a relationship, I had no idea how to do them at all, let alone do them sober, you know? And right there with you, I'd never had sober sex. I was heavily reliant on liquid courage. And that is the thesis of my book is learning how to replace liquid courage with intrinsic courage. And that the reason that I hone in on that language, liquid courage, instead of like sobriety or drunk or anything like that, is because I think that everyone, whether they're sober, whether they're sober curious or a mindful drinker, whatever, everyone can relate to the concept of liquid courage. You don't
Absolutely.
you don't need to get sober to realize that alcohol might be relying on alcohol for confidence, right?
Absolutely.
My personal experience, I'm a woman in recovery. I am an addict in recovery. I had undiagnosed mental health issues and I self-medicated them with drugs and alcohol. Now, 9 years in recovery, I have found healthy tools, but I still take it one day at a time, right?
Right.
Almost a decade in recovery, and we still say one day at a time.
Hmm.
But with my book and with my research, I wanted to open this conversation up even more to people who are sober curious, people who maybe have no plans on giving up alcohol at all, but they're interested maybe in dry dating or having a more mindful sexual experience. So,
Hmm.
and I found that using that language has been really a bridge and it's bringing a lot of people to this conversation as opposed to when I originally started writing this book, it was for people in recovery like you and me.
Hmm.
And so like I'm a big fan of inclusivity and creating room for everyone to come sit at the table so we can all learn together.
That's beautiful and very important because I think sometimes people really get into the weeds when it comes to language, and it can be divisive for some. And it's like, no, this conversation is inclusive of everyone. And to your point, the liquid courage piece, I refer to it as well as like a social lubricant. It eases us up and we're like, oh, and I love this idea of what you mentioned, like intrinsic, not motivation, intrinsic
Courage,
courage, thank you, versus like using
liquid
a
courage,
social,
yeah.
right, liquid courage. And I think that's really important to hone in on because so many people, we know this, default to alcohol to have sexual experiences. The book is very much grounded in research, but you also shared some personal anecdotes that I
Hmm.
found really helpful. I think one piece that so many people can relate to is not feeling comfortable in their vessel, not feeling comfortable in their body. and therefore using alcohol as liquid courage to work up the courage to have sex or to have relationships or to feel more confident, sexy, fill in the blank, right?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to know from you, like, in terms of the research, tell us more about why people are automatically turning to alcohol as liquid courage to work themselves into the bedroom, basically. And then how can we reframe that and start really tapping into, as you mentioned, that intrinsic courage?
Yeah, I mean it's the first chapter of my book is called Dating Yourself, and the second chapter is Body Image Beyond Booze. And I started the book with those chapters for a reason. You have to figure out who you are without alcohol. You have to love who you are without alcohol, or at least like who you are, I would say, before you consider having sober sex or before you go on sober dates. You have to figure out who you are first. And I'm not the first self-help author to say that. You know, if like every episode of RuPaul's Drag Race ends with, if you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love somebody else, right?
Amen. Yep.
So I come to this conversation with, if you can't love yourself without booze, how are you going to love anyone else without booze, right?
Mm.
And so for me, I learned that a lot of my insecurity came from I just didn't feel very smart. So I took a lot of classes. You know, in early sobriety, when I say dating yourself, I'm not just talking about like bubble baths and face masks. I'm talking
Gotcha.
about like getting to know you. Like I
Hmm.
studied Spanish, I took a lot of writing courses, I volunteered, you know, I did these things that I always said I was going to do one day. And then I learned more about myself. And then learning more about myself, learning more about the world, connecting with other people that are not, you know, like I said, I used to meet people in bars. So now
Right.
I'm meeting people in classes and we have a shared interest. We've now bonded because we're both learning Spanish. That is
Mhm.
a stronger bond than connecting over taking some shots,
Right.
right? So there's that, you know, there's the, you know, if you're relying on liquid courage because you don't feel smart, take some classes, volunteer, meet new people. And then on the other end, you know, there was the brains level, but on a visceral level, I
Yeah.
was so insecure in my skin.
Yeah.
I had body dysmorphia. I still have body dysmorphia. It's something I struggle with every day. So
Same.
really getting in touch with my body. There's some masturbation exercises in the book. I think masturbation can really be treated as a form of self-exploration. Like, yes,
Absolutely.
it's an excellent way to like feel good, but you know, in the book there's exercises on ways to connect to your body through masturbation. And for me, that just helped me feel more confident in my skin, helped
Yeah.
me love my body, see my body for who I am. And, you know, if I felt insecure about something, then I would talk to my therapist about it. I would talk to my
Mhm.
friends. I would journal. I would meditate. You know, again, like I had these undiagnosed mental health issues for so long. And then you get a anxiety diagnosis, then you get a body dysmorphia diagnosis. And for me, I found great freedom in those diagnoses because then I could actually do something about them.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, your mental health is going to drive the bus either way. So you might as
Mhm.
well, like, you might as well know what's going on. If you're not treating your mental health with medication or therapy, you're probably self-medicating it with something else. So, you know, if you're
Mhm.
listening and you're thinking like, that this doesn't apply to you. I'm so sorry, but we all have a mental health diagnosis, and I encourage you to figure out what yours is. And you don't need to be fully sober for that, of course, but I did. I had to get sober to address that. But, you know, I think it's just really important to connect to your body, find ways to connect to your body and find ways to connect to your mind. And then when you feel comfortable with that, then I think it's a good time to integrate sober sex and dating.
Okay, love all of that. And just to get into it, right? So, in terms of connecting to body, love the masturbation exercises. I think that's super valuable. Everything you shared. I want to add, it's also teaching you what you find pleasurable because I didn't realize what I really liked or I would accept, another partner's sexual pleasure as my own and think that that was good enough. Whereas it's like, no, I need to discover myself and know what makes me tick, what makes me
Yes.
come, quite literally. And if I don't know that, it's like hard for me to communicate said information to a
Yes.
partner in the future, right? So it's like that part I think is so important. Like there is still a stigma, I think, when it comes to self masturbation, which I have no idea. It's like I've been masturbating, Tawny, since I was probably like 5. Like I
Yes.
didn't know that's what I was doing, but like
Girl,
it feels
same. We
good.
all have. Like, let's talk about it. Let's celebrate it.
Right. There's nothing wrong with it. It's like, yes, it feels good, but like the stigma and the shame, and it's similar to sobriety, right? Or any addiction or recovery. It's
Yeah.
like, oh no, this thing is a dirty secret and I must hide it from the world. It's ridiculous. It's like, no, I want to talk about it. And I think, yeah, the connection to body piece is so important. It reminds me too, because I know that there were less resources or alternate paths in terms of recovery when you were getting sober in 2015. Like I think AA still is sort of like what people think of as like the model on the hill, so to speak. So in AA or traditional recovery spaces, they always recommend not to date in a year, the first year of sobriety. Did you follow that principle, or was it sort of like you're just intuitively you were like, no, I'm going to date myself? As mentioned, I'm going to take these classes. I'm going to really focus on Tawny. I'm going to work on, connecting with, getting maybe like therapy, which is what I did. Was that something that you thought about or recommend to folks at home? Like date yourself, does it need to be for a disclosed amount of time, or will you know when you're ready, I guess is my question.
So I will say everything that I did, it was all an accident. But I for my book, I took what worked. Like
Gotcha.
I was like, I'm not ready to date yet. I'm gonna kind of do my own thing. I didn't, call it dating myself, but I knew that the thought of dating scared the hell out of me. I knew that
Right.
the thought of sex scared the hell out of me. So I just did things that didn't scare the hell out of me, which meant again, I was a New Yorker. I had a whole city to explore. I had new friends I was making. I had a lot going on, and I was writing. I was writing more than ever. So I
Hmm.
was really getting to know myself. I guess my quote problem with the wait 1 year rule is that it's some people need 5 years before
Right. Arbitrary.
and
Yeah.
some people, like, if you've been in therapy for 5 years and you actually have done a lot of that work, and then giving up alcohol was actually the last step, you might actually be pretty far ahead in this kind of
Right.
work. So, it's, I think, a really easy litmus test is like, if how do you feel in your body about having sex right now?
Okay.
How do you
Yeah.
feel in your body about going on a date? And I will say there's a difference between having some anxiety, having first date jitters, and there's a difference between having this visceral, like, oh my God, no, I can't. And I
Yeah.
think that, like, in my book, I talk about the importance of knowing our comfort zones.
Right.
A lot of people talk shit about comfort zones. I'm a big fan of my comfort zone, and I think everyone should spend more time in theirs, because growth really can happen when you feel safe and comfortable. And
Hmm.
if you have been relying on alcohol to get out of your comfort zone, were you even really getting out of your comfort zone? Like, you really have to readdress all of these things back to basics, like you said, like, what is even pleasurable for me? What
Right.
do I even like? And then on the other end of that, what do I not like? What did I
Thank
only
you.
like when I was drunk? What was performative? What was I doing that was to please other people that actually does not do anything for me? So I think finding out both are super important.
I was pretty newly sober, maybe a month under my belt, and I had sex with a friend who had been pursuing me for some time. And it was the worst sexual experience of my life, Tawny. Like the worst. And
Aw.
but here's the problem, right? I wouldn't even call it a problem. I think two things, right? One part is there's no barrier. As mentioned, I've never had sober sex for the first time. I think if I actually were drunk in that situation, I may have thought it was pleasurable, but because I didn't have this substance in me, I was very much present in my body and hated every moment of it. But here's the thing, it's so beautiful to see the growth because at that time, I didn't say anything. I just tolerated it. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna lie here and wait for this to be over.
Mm.
Whereas now I've learned, through my sobriety, through like not just from getting sober, that's part one, but like developing the skills I need to actually communicate and advocate and have boundaries and talk about, what I need and what I don't like and so on and so forth. I've learned, to speak up for myself. Whereas then I was still very much fresh in my insecurities in my body. I felt disconnected beyond our physical connection, but like in my own body, I felt disconnected. So that was one part of it. And then the other part was that it left such a bad taste in my mouth that I became celibate for over a year after
Hmm.
that. And I did the things that you mentioned, though. I started dating myself, and it was a beautiful process because it involved me really developing hobbies, if I'm being honest with you, because I didn't
Yes.
have hobbies outside of drinking, or not real hobbies like that didn't involve drinking. So it was a discovery period, and it sounds like that's what you're recommending, and that's what your book does so well. So one other thing, just a caveat here: what if you're in a relationship? What if you're married? What if you have a long-term partner? Like, can you still date yourself? And what does that process look like? And can that impact your significant other?
Girl, yes. If you are in a relationship, I would say that you need to date yourself more than if you're single.
Fair.
I would say I think it's something that we all need to just do regularly.
Hmm.
I think men and women, all genders, everyone should just not, if you're in a relationship, do not make that relationship your whole world.
Everything. Hmm.
I've been there, I've done that. It never ends well. And I would say, dating yourself, you know, two things here. Dating yourself when you're in a relationship, it could be something as simple as like making sure that you have phone calls with your friends once a week,
Hmm.
or going to get lunch with your girlfriends once a month, or just, it could look like whatever you want. And I would also say if you and your partner are giving up alcohol together, or if one of you is giving up alcohol, it could be fun for you guys to add a new hobby together.
Mm,
Maybe you take a Spanish class together.
mhm.
Maybe you sign up, maybe you guys go do a ballroom dancing workshop. But I think, when you are reevaluating your relationship with alcohol, it is, like you just said, it's so important to find hobbies. It is so important to fill that time that you used to fill with booze and with drinking buddies. And there is a chapter of my book where I talk about, well, there's breakups,
Yeah.
booze-free breakups, because I was like, I can't write a book about sober sex and dating without having a chapter that acknowledges that sober heartache is fucking awful. It's so hard.
And I think,
Also,
sorry, Tanya, I think that's why AA also recommends not dating that first year, because that can send people spiraling
oh
and
yeah,
relapsing. Yeah, breakup is hard.
it's so hard. And it's like, again, if you need a year, take a year. Take as like I love that you took a year for yourself and figured some stuff out, and like you'll take more time if you need it. And you can
Right.
take that time. I will say, if you are in a relationship and you want to take a break from sex, you can absolutely do that.
Mm,
It's we all grow on our own.
right.
Like, and there's a chapter in the book called it's like when your partner drinks, or when you're in a relationship with someone who drinks, because
Mhm.
this is a really important part of it. Like, sometimes you getting sober and your partner drinking still, it could that might be the end of your relationship.
Yeah. Chapter 5, by the way, how to date
Yeah,
someone who drinks.
it could be really devastating to find out that all you have in common was alcohol. And this could be after like marriage and kids, and it could be really difficult. And then you can also have a lovely experience where, maybe you quit drinking and your partner doesn't get sober, but they're a big ally and they support you, and you guys figure out healthy boundaries of what alcohol in the home looks like. It's ultimately it's about communication and figuring out what you need from this experience.
I love that so much. I feel like a good segue to part two of this conversation, and part two of your book, Dry Humping, talks about sex. Let's talk
Woo!
about sex. And now a quick word from our partners.
Okay, butterflies, let me let you in on a little secret. Self-care is so much more than just bubble baths. It's about finding what makes you feel your very best, inside and out. And that's why I've been obsessed with ClassPass for years. Whether I'm crushing a Pilates class, getting a fresh blowout, or treating myself to a relaxing facial, ClassPass lets me explore all kinds of fitness and wellness options. With just one membership, I can book workouts, beauty treatments, and so much more all in one app. I've been a member since 2016, and I've booked over 500 reservations. ClassPass makes it easy and fun to prioritize my health and happiness, all while staying on budget. And because I want you to feel just as amazing as I do, I've got an exclusive offer for my listeners. Sign up with my special link and you'll get a free trial and 20 bonus credits to use toward any classes or services you want to try. So, what are you waiting for? Take that first step toward feeling your best. Head to ClassPass to get started today.
We've been talking about sex, but I want to kind of get more into it. So, as mentioned, I'm having a sexual liberation as we speak, and I'm loving every
Yes.
moment of it. It's like, no, it's like my sexual renaissance. I'm like, who was this girl? Where was she this whole time? She's been inside of me. But anyway, she's coming out, and I love it. And so, part 2 of your book is phenomenal. I love all parts of the book, and I once again want to resonate with folks at home. Like, you should date yourself and like define what that looks like for you. But in terms of introducing other people into the
Yeah.
fold, how can we have better sexual experiences without relying on booze? Because I know in this part of the book you talk about biochemistry, you talk about how booze interacts with our bodies, you talk about alcohol-free aphrodisiacs, which
Yeah.
I'm so for. But like, how do we do that without relying on our good old faithful trusted boozy friend?
Well, I think, when you are dating yourself, you're going to most likely realize why you used alcohol the way you used alcohol. So for this context, you've probably figured out why you used alcohol in the bedroom or
I
to
feel more
get,
confident
yeah,
to
like,
let go, to
and
be freakier.
exactly,
List
like,
goes on and on.
so I would say don't embark on sober sex until you've answered that question and
Beautiful.
let it take some time. Do not rush it. So then if you have figured out you have done that work and you're like, okay, I took 2 shots of whiskey before a date because I was really anxious and I just wanted to pregame. So, figuring out new ways to pregame, like maybe that means you go to the gym first, or maybe
Mhm.
you meditate first, or you have tea first. There's a list of herbal aphrodisiacs in that chapter. But it's also like if you're wanting to feel more confident, maybe you're like, you send a selfie to the group chat and be like, this is what I'm wearing tonight. Let them
Yep.
gas you up, and you don't
Yep.
need that liquid courage, right? So these are some, fun tips for like getting ready for the date. But when it comes to actually like engaging in sober sex for the first time, you know, I was I would think it was like 5 or 6 months before I had did any sort of intimate activity with someone else. And I was very honest with this person. And I said, we had been dating for like a month, so he knew I was sober, but I was just like, I just want you to know this is my first time having sex without alcohol. I'm really nervous and
Mhm.
I want to take this as slow as possible. And he was lovely. I am so grateful
That's
that
great.
he was patient and I would argue that the best sex is sex that you can like communicate and laugh through because like it's
Absolutely.
awkward, like it's
Yep.
there's so much going on. Like if you've got to be able to like be comfortable enough with yourself to advocate, hey, I'm new to this and I'm scared. That's
Yeah.
really hard to say, right?
And that's the
So
piece I was missing. I
yeah.
didn't advocate for myself. Like, I told him, but I didn't communicate fully how nervous I was about the experience going into it.
Did you know how nervous you were?
Yes, I did know. I
So
just didn't have the courage,
yeah.
I guess, the intrinsic courage to speak up for myself because default mode, I'm a reformed, semi-reformed people pleaser. And another thing about drinking and dating, I was always more preoccupied with whether the person liked me versus do I even like the person. I have discernment now to no longer do that, and I'm like only focused on like whether I like the person. But yeah, it was interesting. I was still in that mindset where it's like, oh, must get this man attracted to me
Yeah.
and like have to make him want to have sex with me. Like it was just
Yeah.
like that's my default baseline, and it was awful. And the thing is, he was sober too. So I was just like, is this how sober people have sex? Like, ew. I don't want to be signed up for this. So I just didn't have sex for a year. Anyway.
Well, I'm glad that you took a year-long break from sex instead of saying, okay, I'm going back to drinking.
Yes, but like that could have been
But
triggering enough, truly.
because people, that happens. That
Yeah.
literally happens. So, I think another question to ask yourself is like, if you think drunk sex is better, why? And sit with that.
Mm,
Think about that. Answer that question with your therapist. Bring it up when you're hanging out with your girlfriends. Like, ask the group chat. Like, seriously, that is such an important question to ask yourself because that will tell you why you were relying on it. And most
yeah,
likely it's a confidence insecurity issue on some level, right?
yeah,
Um, there's also the element of queerness and coming out. A
yeah.
lot of people that I interviewed for my book were, they were reliant on alcohol to try to make themselves like sex or try to make
Mhm,
themselves like sex with a different gender.
mhm.
And then they got sober, or they either got sober and then they came out, or they came out and they realized, wow, I don't need alcohol actually.
Right.
I was with the wrong gender,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
really letting when I say dating yourself, this is the stuff I'm talking about. I'm talking about
Mm.
really figuring out who you are and the role alcohol plays in your life, especially when other people come into the mix.
I think that's profound. So ask yourself, what was that question again, Tawny? Like asking yourself, why do you think having sex with
Yeah,
alcohol is better?
yeah, ask
Yeah.
yourself like why do I think drunk sex is better? Why
Yeah.
do I why do I have two glasses of wine before every date?
Mm,
Whatever you do, whatever, get very honest with yourself and then
yeah.
journal about that. Ask, have a conversation with yourself in the mirror. Sounds crazy, but I do it. Like, talk things out, and that's when you're going to notice some significant changes in yourself and in the relationships that you have with other people. And there's more people are struggling with people pleasing and bedroom performance than we realize.
Right.
In my book, I talk about how I stopped faking orgasms when I
Oh
quit
god.
drinking.
Yeah.
I was like
I was the
literally
queen of the fake scream.
yeah, I was like, okay, cue up the noises, cue up, like, start gyrating the hips. Like, I
Oh.
knew I should have won an Academy Award. I was so good. And then the
Mhm.
first time I had sober sex, I realized, oh, this is when I start to fake. And I don't
Mm,
want to do
mhm.
that with this guy. I like this guy. He respects me. It felt like lying because it is,
Okay. It is like
it is
it
lying.
is.
Um, so it's, and that's what I mean, where it's like when I say insecurity, it's not just I don't feel cute. It's like I feel so insecure that I think my only responsibility in this sexual act is to please that guy.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
worried about my pleasure at all. I am only here to please this person.
Yeah.
And that could be a very fun, sexy game if you know you're playing it.
That's your thing.
But
But yeah,
but if
if you
if
don't
you
know,
if you don't know, then it's not a sexy game.
it's not sexy. Yeah. That's so real. I think yeah, sober sex is beautiful for me especially I think I've realized is because I'm having more authentic connections, not just with platonic relationships, but quite literally, like I'm not having sex because I think I'm supposed to have sex now. Like this is just the natural progression of things. And as mentioned, I just want this person to like me. I'm having sex because I want to. I'm choosing to have sex. And I think another thing is, I mean, we can talk about gender, race, like other things play roles, like in terms of how you were raised, religious affiliations, things like that. Because
Yeah.
I think so much of it too was shame, connected to shame for me. Like as a woman, I'm not supposed to have X body count. And if I get drunk, I'm able to sort of let that go and be this like freer person. And the thing though, Tawny, is I would have shame the next day. So I'd
Hmm.
wake up like, oh fuck, like I had sex with this person. And I don't know if I would have. So I to frame it now with when it comes to sober sex, why I think it's so much more profound and deeper is because I'm choosing to actively have sex with this person. Like
Yeah.
every fiber of my being is like, I consent. I am here. I want to be here. I choose you. And that is not something that I did fully before. And I'm not saying that, these bad things happened to me. Like I was there. I was there. I chose to be there. But like, was I fully there? No. And that's the thing about alcohol. It really does blur the lines. And I don't like that haziness. And I really feel just so much more connected to my sexual partners now because I'm showing up as my authentic self. And I communicate better, to your point. Like I'm able to tell them, like, I like this, I don't like that.
Yeah.
And thanks. Thanks for taking me into account.
Bye. That was
Right, I'm
fun.
not having my fake orgasms. If I don't come, I don't come. Sorry, try harder next time. I don't know. No, not even try harder next time. Like literally, like I will show you how next time.
And
But
sometimes, like, let's also like let's remove the orgasm pressure because
yes,
like
there is
it's
pressure.
also it's an orgasm is such a small part of a sexual experience or an
You know
intimate
what?
experience. So
Hmm.
like, we grew up reading like Cosmo and 17, like talking about like where the orgasm was like the most important thing, and it's like it's just part of it. And so I
And
think
it's
if
unrealistic to expect that you're going to orgasm
no,
every single time
especially
you have
for like
sex.
women and especially women that have sex with men, it's not happening every time unless you know your body or you feel comfortable enough to speak up. Like, so just I just want to say don't don't center the orgasm.
That's fair. That is fair. And it takes the pressure off, to your point, right?
Yeah.
So I'm more likely to probably orgasm if I'm not obsessing over, okay, when am I going to orgasm?
Yeah.
And it's not connected to performance. Yeah, it's very performative when you're like, oh, this is how you know I enjoyed my
Yeah.
sex with you, the grand finale. So we've covered what it means to date yourself, getting to know yourself, what matters to you, what doesn't matter as much, figuring out how to navigate sexual experiences without alcohol. Part 3 of your book talks a lot about, I love the framing of this because we know drunk in love, right? Like we
Yeah.
think of Beyonce drunk in love or like
Yeah.
love in a hopeless place, Rihanna, but your part 3 is undrunk love.
Yes.
And I've had a lot more drunk love experiences than I have undrunk love experiences, Tawny. So can you walk us through what this part of the book entails and how we can redefine current relationships that we have that may be too focused around booze?
So I structured the book, like you said, the first third's about dating, the middle is about sex, and then the last part is just about relationships. It's about communication, it's about setting boundaries, it's about identifying your boundaries and then communicating those boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, I feel like every answer I've given you has gone back to dating yourself because when you're dating yourself and you're figuring out who you are, that's also when you're figuring out your boundaries. That's
Mm,
when you're figuring out your communication style,
mm-hmm.
And so if you could figure these things out and then share that with somebody, that's going to be one of the deepest relationships you've ever had because you know who you are, you know what you're bringing to the relationship. You guys, if you're lucky enough to find someone on a similar journey, someone who also is in therapy or does this kind of work, you can have a really beautiful relationship where you're communicating about the hard things. You don't need alcohol to, sit, like, oh God, we have to talk about our budget. You don't need alcohol to get through that conversation because you've already actually done a lot of work on your finances already, hopefully. And if you haven't, that's totally fine. But being able to just acknowledge, I have an unhealthy relationship with money, you
Yeah.
know, and that makes me lie or spend secretively or, again, you're figuring these things out with yourself, which again make it easier to have money conversations with a partner. So
Yeah.
it's the same kind of thing, creating boundaries in the home. If your partner drinks and you don't, or vice versa, figuring out like, are you a zero alcohol household? Or are you
Mm.
okay with them drinking, but the alcohol just needs to be out of sight, out of mind for you? Or if they go out drinking, or do you feel comfortable kissing them when they get home? Do you want them to sleep on the
Can
couch
taste
when they
that
get
liquor.
home?
Can taste that liquor on their
Yeah.
tongue. I'll
And
tell
that's
you
so
that much.
this
Yeah.
is what I mean, where it's like you're figuring out you're, a lot of these things you're not going to know
No
until they
upfront.
happen.
Yeah.
Like when I was dating, I dated people who drank and didn't drink, but I quickly learned that I cannot kiss somebody if they smell like whiskey because it
Mm.
made me want whiskey. So,
Mhm.
these things are going to come up, and it's just important to like feel that gut check of like, okay, how does this make me feel?
Yeah.
Does my sobriety feel jeopardized in any way? Does this person support my sobriety? Do they convince me to try and have just one?
Mm.
So it's, like I said, it all goes back to dating yourself and figuring out what exactly you want out of a relationship and who you are. And the communication, it's like there's conversation templates in my book because, we
Mhm.
don't know how to have these difficult conversations, um, even just like about the dishes. As silly,
Yeah.
there's literally a text conversation that I have learned with my husband how to talk to him about the dishes. That's in the book. And you're like, why is that in a sex book? Because it's a communication book. It's a book about communication and
It's a book about
relationships.
communication.
It's about relationships. And if you're
Yeah.
not talking about the budget and the dishes and all the other stuff, like then you're not really having a full relationship.
So going back to dating yourself, you're getting honest with yourself. You're working on, how to communicate those truths about yourself to other people. To your point, things come up as they come up, but like you're working on communicating. It's a fine skill that needs to be, taught for some people, like, and or not even just taught, like it's something that constantly needs to be worked on.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned your husband. So I know that your husband's also sober, which is amazing. And I want to talk about some projects that you guys have co created.
Yeah.
Really quickly before we do so, I was curious to learn from you. So backstage, we were talking like the first time we met, actually, I was with my then boyfriend, current ex. But something, he was sober as well. And something that was beautiful about that, aside from someone that just, isn't obsessed about drinking, was this idea that one time he came to me and he said, I would love to develop a relapse plan with you. And I was just wondering if you'd ever heard of this or if you and your husband had any action or game plan in place should either one of you feel triggered or relapse, or I don't even know why your husband is sober. So I don't want
Yeah.
to say relapse per se, but just have you guys had that talk as well, just in terms of communicating, all right, what are these things that we need to do for each other if one person starts to slip or feels like they want to drink?
I I know he's your ex, but that is an emotionally intelligent man. I'm
He
so
was.
sorry.
He was. When he said that, like, I was like, whoa, that
Yeah,
is
like that's hot.
powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm the problem, Tawny. That was a great plan. So I was just wondering.
I love that language, the relapse plan, because that's actually something that is talked about in some rehabs
Mm.
where you talk about like, okay, life is going to happen. You feel like you have a good grasp on it now, but what about when this happens or this happens or this happens or shit hits the fan? What happens if you relapse? So
Mhm.
there are actually some rehab programs where they prescribe a relapse while you're in treatment so you can go through the relapse
Mm.
with support, with peer support, with medical support, with psychiatric support. I think it's so smart because I come from a very realistic harm reduction approach. Like, again, I
Mhm.
don't think everybody needs to be fully sober. I'm not anti alcohol at all.
Mhm.
And people make mistakes, people slip up. So, anyway, I just love that language relapse plan. We don't have that, but we do have a very open line of communication where it's like we know when things go really hard, we talk about it. And I'll be
Mhm.
like, "You know what? I would love to take a shot of whiskey right now. I would love to do that, and I can't." So being with someone who is also in recovery, is helpful because he gets it. Whereas if I were to share that with someone who doesn't know what we've been through, they might be like, "Oh my God, what do I do? Like, is she about to relapse?" But it's like, no, it's okay to admit today was a really hard day and I would love to just black out for a little bit. You know? I think just talking about it is huge. And so I'm curious, like, how did you respond to that question? Like, did you guys have a relapse plan? Did you guys have a conversation about it?
We did have a conversation. So he said it to me right before I took a trip to Asia for a month. And then when I came back, it kind of like was like, yeah, yeah, we'll get around to it. We'll get around to it. And then we broke up. But I was just so impressed by, like you mentioned, his emotional, like, intellect. Like he really thought about it. But in the same with the same breath, I think he struggled from um as we all do, but depression. So I think he was also anticipating, not anticipating a relapse, but wanted to just have support as he should from his partner. And so we talked about what it could look like, but we never actually sat down because he wanted to actually like map out like step
Yeah.
one, step two. He was a very like visual, analytical person, and I was just like, "Oh, sounds great. Let's put it on. Let's get around to it." But yeah, that's why I brought it up with you because I'm like, in the future, if I were to, that was my last relationship. If I were to enter a relationship again, it would be something that I would also bring up
Yeah.
because no matter what, I'm the sober partner in recovery. So I would need to feel supported by my partner, whether they're sober or not, to know what's going on. But to your point, I think the communication, right? You're able to feel comfortable enough to talk about it with the other person. I think that's helpful. But he was also, now it's coming back to me, he also brought up like signs. He was like, because, if I'm being avoidant or if I'm doing this, like I might not even clock what's going on, but I want you to be able to pick up on it. So he was very like very very specific and detailed with his approach to it, which was cool. Yeah.
I mean, I kind of want you to text him,
I
but
can't. I would hurt him. No, full disclosure, he doesn't want to talk to me.
okay, okay. But so I will also say on this note, this conversation reminds me of transfer addictions. So even
Yeah.
though, you know, honestly, I am not tempted by alcohol at all anymore. I'm very grateful for that, but I will say that I've developed like work addiction,
Mhm.
social media addiction,
Mhm.
um, my body dysmorphia takes over sometimes. So it's like
Mhm.
these kinds of things, while no, they're not relapses, it's still my addiction manifesting in other self-destructive ways.
Mhm.
So these are all things that I learned by dating myself. Oh, this, like it's still, those things don't go away. The
Yeah.
anxiety doesn't go away. Your body
Yeah.
image issues don't go away. They're still there. You just have
Yeah.
healthy coping skills now, which again, that's why I'm a big fan of harm reduction. If like me, if I'm doom scrolling too much, it's better than getting fucked up.
Yep.
Or if I'm overworking, it's better than being out at a bar.
Yep.
So, but it's also no work addiction is real. Social
Yeah.
media addiction is real. So these are things that, I talk to him about where I'm like, I deleted Instagram from my phone and I'm like, okay, I'm not doom scrolling anymore. Now I'm just working all the time. So it's like, so, it's that kind of thing I think is just as important to talk about just
Mhm.
as the alcohol.
Yeah. I can get into addiction transference.
Yeah.
I've seen many different iterations over the
Yeah.
course of my 3 years of sobriety. I'll say that. But to your point, harm reduction, I think for me, my drug of choice was alcohol. Anything is better. Not
Yeah.
anything, but the things that I'm doing now that might be considered problematic, I think a lot of it is connected to body image, over exercising, things like that. Like
Yeah.
I'm like, it's still a healthier coping mechanism, and it ebbs and flows, right? Like it's not always like now I'm spiraling out about this one thing. Like, it comes and goes. But to your point, the signs sometimes appear in different areas of our life, and I think recognizing that is healthy still, right?
It is.
Um,
We are deeply imperfect beings, and being alive is really hard. I
yeah,
think that if my one takeaway for listeners would be like just give yourself grace and
give yourself grace.
be nice to yourself. This is so hard. Being alive is so hard, especially if you are struggling with addiction or mental health or body image, or, you're queer and you can't come out, like
Mm-hmm.
it's even harder. So be kind to yourself and find community. That's my biggest piece of advice.
I love that. As we wind down, Tawny, I would love to just hear about other projects. You've accomplished so much. So, obviously, we've been talking extensively about your book, Dry Humping. But I also know that with your husband, which I've gotten to try, I love it. You have a brand, a non alcoholic brand called Parenthesis, and there's different lines. Can you talk to us a little bit about
Yeah.
that and the Sobriety Deck? I would love to hear all about it. And just also what sparked the idea. I'm just like, that is so
Yeah.
brilliant. It's giving sober power couple. Like I just absolutely love it. So tell us more.
I love that. Yeah, so I'll give you the elevator pitch for the drink. So Nick was a sommelier who quit drinking. So he
Whoa.
knows a lot about beverage. He knows a lot about, beverage industry, history, and all that. And I was I was a bartender, but I was not a, flavor expert like he is. But I will say I missed having a stiff drink. As
Mm.
I've mentioned whiskey probably 10 times on this podcast. So I missed having a strong drink, you know?
Mhm.
And I just really wanted, like, I was very unimpressed with the non-alc whiskey options. And
Mhm.
so Nick, when we put our brains together, his sommelier education, my desire for a stiff drink, we
Yep.
realized that what we could get that from fermentation. So he got
Okay.
really into fermentation. He started fermenting everything, making all different types of vinegar. So our drink it's a seaweed vinegar base,
That's
and that
awesome.
adds like a really good mouthfeel. And then we use that vinegar to extract the botanicals. So
That's awesome.
it's a bold spirit, but it's called Parentheses 'cause it's a before and an after. And the before has got floral notes where the after is more smoky. So
I
yeah,
love that.
I love it. Or we're so proud of it. It's been out for a year, and it's doing the thing. We were just in Men's Health for best stiff NA drink. So that's
Yeah,
exciting.
I love that. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
thank you.
Okay, I gotta ask you, is there any aphrodisiac component to it? Or is that something that maybe a parentheses part 3 can entail?
So we're because it's called Parentheses, and with me being a writer, going with the literary theme,
Mhm.
we're playing around with like, well, what would like what's a sexy punctuation mark that we could do something with
Hmm.
aphrodisiac properties? So I'll ask you, what is the sexiest punctuation mark that maybe we could do?
The first thing that came to mind was the semicolon. I don't know why. I'm like,
Oh,
it's like the dot and then like the little curvature of I mean, listen to me. Because parentheses are pretty sexy. But I'm like the semicolon, it's like, oh, dot, it's like not a dot dot dot. It's like, oh, I'm not done yet. I'm gonna
yeah.
continue. Like, so maybe
Ooh.
that can be like the middle in between the parentheses, the semicolon. I don't know where I'm going with this,
No,
but
it's maybe like the semicolon's kind of like edging. It's like,
yes.
oh, you think
Oh,
it's ending, but we're not there yet.
we're not there yet. We're not done, baby.
Yes.
We're not done.
I
I
love
love
that.
that.
Okay,
Jinx.
I'm collecting data, so we'll see. So yeah, that's Parentheses, and then my podcast co-host and we just came out with the Sobriety Deck. It's a self-help card deck
Mhm.
focusing on sobriety. So, it's split up into 5 different categories, and whatever you're going through that day, maybe it's sobriety toolkit, maybe it's relationships, you pull a card, kind of like tarot. You just pull,
I love
you
that.
get the advice that you need that day. And it was just so fun to work on it together. Again, working on the drink with Nick and working on
Yeah.
this card deck with my podcast co-host slash bestie. I'm all about community. I'm all about collaboration. So, writing a book is a very lonely process. It's just you and
Mhm.
your laptop, and it's very different. Whereas the drink, it's us together. It's putting our brains together and then taking this thing out to the world. And the deck, Lisa and I were on Zoom for like hours at a time, just like sharing a Google Doc, writing together, and it was really fun. So yeah.
I love that. And just final question for you. If you could offer Tawny any piece of advice from all of the perspective you have today, what would you give her in regards to relationships, love, sex, life, anything?
Oh man. I know I've already said this, but like giving yourself grace, I didn't really
Mm,
understand what that meant. When I was newly sober, and even still, I still feel like I'm having to make up for lost time because I'm like, I spent 10 years getting blackout drunk. My writing career
mhm.
didn't even start till I was 30. I have so much to catch up on. Um, just remember that everyone's path is different and don't compare your path to other people's, because that's what I did. I compared my drinking to other people's, I compared my sobriety to other people's, I compared my writing to other people. And what do you get from that? You know?
Yeah.
So I would say stop comparing and just be really nice to yourself.
And when you compare, you do yourself a disservice because there's only one you, right? It's like, what's the point of measuring your success or measuring your worth against some random person who's probably, by the way, doing the same thing, right? They're
Yes.
comparing their work or their life to someone else's. And it's never really what you think. I know going back to social media, like I see the good, the bad, the ugly, because the good parts are, yes, like I can draw inspiration sometimes from people. For me, getting sober, I didn't know anyone sober in my real life. I'm like, let me look online, look at these shiny, amazing people living their best lives without alcohol. That was important to me. But also, I'm sure you can relate to this. You meet people in real life and you're like, oh, you're a person.
Yeah.
Like you're a real person. Like it's fine that you're a real person, but it's never what you may expect or assume. And even if they do present a certain way, we don't know what's going on beneath the surface. So I just think that's so important. And when you were sharing about like giving yourself grace, and especially in regards to mental health, yeah, I look back and sometimes I cringe about all of the years I wasted binge drinking, blacking out, putting myself in compromising situations. But then even getting the diagnosis for ADHD, like once I understood that, I'm like, wow, makes
Yeah.
sense. Or like masking or like thinking about the self-medication that I was doing. Trauma. We haven't gotten into some of that stuff, but like, yeah, that all lives in there. And that it was me protecting myself to the best of my ability at that time with the information I had. Now I know better. I'm doing better. So yeah, I love giving yourself grace. Thank you for that,
Of
Tawny.
course, that's literally all we can do. I mean, it's life seems to just be getting harder. So, if we could be nice to each other and nice to ourselves and just listen, listen, don't talk all the time. Listen to what people are saying, read books, um,
Mhm.
and I would say think critically. Yeah, read dry,
Dry humping rated
definitely
them out.
start with dry humping. But I would say think what's I think we need more critical thinking and
Yeah.
be okay with not knowing the answer to things. You don't Another thing I did when I was insecure was like I would like lie, like making shit up because I felt like I needed to know the answer. And it's like totally okay to just if someone asks you, it's like, actually, I don't know. Let me think on that. And if some
Thank you for saying
just
that. That was me on
yeah,
dates. I'd be like, "Oh, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about," and I have no idea what this
no,
man just said.
don't
Yeah,
pretend. Like just
don't
stop
pretend.
pretending. These are all forms of lying.
Yep.
And just yeah, just don't do it anymore.
Critical thinking, we have a brain, let's
Yes.
use it. Actively listening, we have ears, let's open them. And a voice, speak your
Use your
truth, right? Like,
voice.
use your voice, have an original thought, have an original opinion. You don't have to say yes just because somebody asked you a question and you don't want to be the only person that has a different opinion.
Have the
Um,
different opinion. Be the one with the
yeah, have
different
a different
opinion
opinion.
and advocate for it because the other people, half of them are just saying yes because they want to agree with everyone else. So use your
Exactly.
voice. Women,
Hmm.
use your voice.
Yes. And stop faking orgasms.
Literally. Stop faking everything.
Stop making life.
Just
It's not. We're laughing, we're smiling. It's not okay. Everything's burning. But you know what? I'm happy to be here and I'm happy to be sober. And in this sober life, like nothing is perfect, but yet everything is like as it should be somehow. So I'm happy with that.
it's one day at a
And
time, right?
it's one day at a time. And I'm so honored to have you here. You've shared so many gems, and I'm going to link everything in the show notes. I'm going to link Parenthesis where they can buy it. I'm going to link Dry Humping. I bought mine on Amazon, but if there's another place, we'll link it in the show notes. And I'm going to recommend the Sobriety Deck, which I think is, can this be played with other people? Is this like a game, or is it like affirmation style? Like you pull one and it's for you, or can you do this with other
I've
people
seen,
as well?
I've seen both. If you want it to be a more personal thing, I would try it with yourself first. Kind of
Okay.
like dating yourself.
Just like the book. Yeah,
Like
just like the book.
masturbate a few times, and then
Yep.
if you want to bring other people into it, then you can.
It's good
Yeah,
sex time. Yeah.
exactly.
Let's do it. Let's bring everyone in. Yeah, no, I like that. I mentioned it because I'm having a little Valentine's Day sober girl
Oh
party.
yeah,
And so I was like, oh, should I bring your sobriety deck there?
you
Or should it
can.
be something I do by
I've
myself?
seen people use it as, there's each card has like writing prompts, thought prompts. So if you want to do it, like you guys could journal together or just answer the question in a group, everyone kind of say what comes up. But just keep in mind it is about sobriety. So some personal stuff might come up, and then if you
Yeah.
don't feel like sharing, that's totally fine. That's the only reason I would say it may not be good
Okay.
for a group setting.
But you could journal, right? Like if everyone had
Totally.
like their own little like, okay, like notepad or like in their phone
Yeah, I
on their
mean,
notes
if
app.
it's a sober event already,
Yeah.
people are coming to like talk about this kind
Connect.
of
Yeah.
stuff anyway.
Yeah.
So I think in that sense, absolutely, it should be good. And if you do, please, I would let me know. Send me a picture. I'd love that would make me really
I
happy.
will. I will, seriously, because I'm like, we're looking for different like games and things like that. Not, I know it's not a game, but I'm like different activities, and I feel like that would be a
It is.
nice
It's an
thing to
activity for sure.
bring. Yeah. Okay, Tawny, thank you so much. Linking everything in the show notes. You are just amazing. I'm so glad we got to connect and have this moment, and I'm sure I'm going to see you around NYC doing your thing. And thank you for coming on the Sober Butterfly today.
Thanks for having me.